Liderler ve Kararlar programında bu hafta Stockholm'dayız. Şimdi 1991-94 yılları arasında Başbakanlıkta yapmış olan şu anki İsveç Dışişleri Bakanı Carl Bildt ile görüşeceğiz.
Avrupa Birliği'nin en büyük 3. ülkesi İsveç, Saygın Ekonomist dergisinin demokrasi indeksinde 1. sırada olup, Birleşmiş Milletler'in İnsani Gelişme Endeksine göre ise 7. sırada yer alır. Orta Çağ'dan beri bağımsız olan tek Avrupa ülkesi İsveç'in halkı güçlü politik katılıma sahiptir ve eğitim alanında ise dünyanın en gelişmiş ülkelerinden biridir. Türkiye'nin deyim yerinde ise olmak istediği ülke olan İsveç'in son zamanlarda en çok eleştirilen yanı özellikle yakın geçmişte artan ırkçılık ve yabancı düşmanlığıdır. Liderler ve Kararların bu haftaki konuğu İsveç Dışişleri Bakanı Carl Bildt ise 1991-1994 arası İsveç Başbakanlığı yapmış, Balkanlar konusunda uzman bir politikacı ve diplomattır. Bosna Savaşı'nı sonlandıran Dayton Anlaşması'nın mimarlarından olan Bildt, Türkiye'nin AB üyeliğini en çok destekleyen politikacılardan olarak bilinir.
Mr. Bildt, thank you very much for being on Leaders and Decisions. I'd like to start off with one of your most important experiences, which is your experience in the Balkans. Amongst various other posts that you held in the Balkans, your last role there was the United Nations Secretary General Special Envoy for the Balkans. What are your thoughts on the current situation in Bosnia, which seem to suggest that the country's ethnic divide is preventing national unity and even compromising the country's stability?
I think overall the trend is, in spite of the problems that are there, overall the trend in the region is a positive one. We have better regional cooperation than there has been in modern history or since the wars 20 years ago or 10 years ago in different cases. And we are beginning to solve some of the most difficult problems. Bosnia is the most complicated. Macedonia and Bosnia, I would say, are the complicated places where things are moving slightly slower than otherwise. I mean, there are the ethnic or whatever you call the divide in Bosnia that is making things somewhat more difficult. That is problems that we are familiar with from other parts of Europe. That might be Belgium, that might be Spain, that might be, I'm not going to mention Cyprus, but there are countries where you have these problems. But if you take that into account, I think Bosnia is gradually moving forward. I think we need to give them time. I think we need to have a certain amount of patience. I think we need to say to them, you have to get the act together, you have to make your compromises, you have a common future and you have a common responsibility for it.
I'd like to ask a follow-up question on Bosnia with regards to the role Turkey has been playing in the negotiation process. It has received a lot of criticism, saying that it has been playing a one-sided game, actually holding the rights of Muslims above the rights of all other ethnicities in Bosnia. What is your view of the role Turkey has been playing, and do you think it's been effective?
I think that Mr. Davutoglu is very well aware of the need for Turkey to have a balancing and a balanced role in the Balkans. An active, certainly, and a balanced role. And he's been doing a lot of things in order to establish better relationship with Serbia, which, of course, has been a somewhat, if you go back in history, a somewhat more problematic one. Then in Bosnia, there have been sort of Bosnian Muslim interests that have been interested in playing the Turkish card. But that has been coming to a large extent from Bosnia itself, that effort. But I think Turkey has been aware of the fact that the Turkish role has to be a role for all of the Balkans. And I think that role overall has been a positive and a constructive one.
Staying within the region, but moving on to another area of tension, is the situation in Kosovo. There were recent elections in Kosovo, and that were actually called as a test for the political maturity of the Kosovo nation. Do you think that this was achieved as a result of the recent elections? And also, of course, the quite important report that was released by the Council of Europe that was, in a way, claiming that the Kosovo Prime Minister Taci was involved, was even the boss of a criminal network that dealt in drugs and organ trafficking. What effect is this going to have on Kosovo's political standing in the international arena?
Well, I haven't read the report. Those issues and those accusations have been around for quite some time, and they were the subject to certain investigations by the UN at the time. I think it's important that they are that is cleared up by the competent authorities, by the legal authorities. And I would expect that to be the case. As for the elections, yeah, you said a test of maturity. Nations as well as humans grow up gradually. And I think this was an important step forward for Kosovo. I mean, there were some problems, obviously, in parts of the election. We still have a situation where in the north, the Serbs really don't take part in the elections. I mean, it's still a divided camp up in the north. But in the south, the Serb minority, that seems to be sort of gradually working better. Then let's see. I think the real test will be the formation of the government after the election. And I would hope that they will form a government reasonably fast. Because one of the issues, there are two main issues on the agenda. The first is the economy, which is in a sort of desperate situation, needs a good government that governs. And the second, related to a certain extent to this, is the dialogue with Belgrade, where the European Union is now facilitating talks with Belgrade that are going to focus on a lot of practical issues that are of importance, not the least, from the economic point of view. So I would hope that there will be a speedy formation of the government so that one can move ahead with these issues.
Before we move on to a different subject, I'd like to ask you if you wanted to say a few words on your former colleague, the late Mr. Holbrooke, whom you actually co-chaired the Dayton Peace Agreement with.
I had a lot of experience with him over the years, both in, we started together in Bosnia, very intense, extremely intense during the final phases of the war and trying to get the peace and then getting the peace to work. I was living in Sarajevo for 2 years doing that, and then suddenly there was Kosovo, perhaps not that unexpected, and we were both in different capacities dragged into that. And then we've been doing Afghanistan also together. So he was a very sort of outstanding diplomat, but also an outstanding politician who could move things and had a strategic perspective in what he was doing. A good friend of Turkey also, by the way, and clearly saw the strategic significance of having good links with Turkey.
Mr. Holbrooke was indeed an exceptional diplomat. The only conflict that he ever walked out from without a resolution was Cyprus.
That is true.
And when I speak to diplomats, they tell me that in the past 25 years, every diplomat who's ever been actually involved in this issue came in hoping that he would be able to come to a solution, come to a peace agreement, and this has been unable to be achieved. I believe that, from what I've heard, the Turkish president, the Turkish Cypriot president, Eroğlu, has recently paid you a visit in Sweden. What did you talk about? Do you think that there might be a solution to the peace process during the next meeting in New York on January 26th?
Well, Mr. Eroğlu was here, and I think we had good talks. What I stressed to him, and I've said the same thing to my Greek Cypriot friends, is that now is really the time to do the final compromises that are necessary in order to solve this particular problem, which would be to the great benefit not only of the region but of all of the people living on the island of Cyprus. I mean, the economic benefits are quite substantial. And as a matter of fact, if you look at what they have achieved during these years, they have nearly sorted out, or practically sorted out, the governance issues. And the governance issues are really the most difficult ones. And they are the ones that are going to be the important ones in the long term. They now need to deal with the property issues. They are to a large extent issues of the past. And they need to deal with the territorial issues. And there's a link between the property and the territorial issues, and they need to make a compromise there. But the point I've made to them is that 5 or 10 years from now, it's going to be the governance issues that are going to be important. The property and the territorial issues are going to fade in significance when the island moves together under a governance system that is to the satisfaction of both of the communities. So I would say they have solved the most critical issues and need to make the compromises on the remaining ones and then have a solution approved in 2 referendums, and it would be to the great benefit of the island. It has tremendous economic potential for the future. But that would only come when there is the final agreement.
That's a very positive note. Hopefully that will come true. A lot of people do believe, at least in Turkey and also I think on the Greek Cypriot side, that the property issue is one of the most important issues. But
the property issue is important. But I dealt with, going back to Bosnia, I dealt with the property issue there. And the property issue was, I would say, if you look at it, even more difficult in Bosnia than on Cyprus. Now, the difference was, of course, that Cyprus has been there, the conflict has been sort of frozen for a very long time. But here the conflict was raw. We set up a property commission to deal with these issues. And you haven't heard of the property issue in Bosnia since then. It was sorted out. There was compensation. We recognized there was the right to ownership, fundamental. But then most people, they did their own agreements. They sold and they bought. And there was compensation. And I would say that showed that issue, although extremely emotional, needless to say, and there's an economic aspect of it that needs to be taken care of, that can be handled if the political will is there.
Hopefully we'll see the political will, and hopefully this time something that late Mr. Holbrooke was unable to solve will be solved. So it will be a continuation of his legacy, let's say.
I think there are, as a matter of fact, good possibilities. I mean, President Christofias, in my opinion, is personally committed to a solution. And Mr. Eroglu said the same to me. I mean, he's been of a somewhat different mind before. But he said that he now sees what needs to be done. And I have no doubt that the government in Ankara is of the same inclination.
Sweden entered into the European Union under your term as Prime Minister back in 1994. Turkey has been going through a very similar process since 2005, but actually the process has been painfully slow. What kind of advice could you give to the Turkish public, to the Turkish government, in terms of the European Union accession talks?
Well, we've been trying to share our lessons. I mean, there are big differences between Sweden and Turkey, but a certain amount of patience. We knocked on the door for quite some time, and there were people inside the European Union, believe it or not, who thought that Swedish membership of the European Union was a threat, and they tried to prevent us from even submitting an application for membership for a while, and then they tried to delay us for a while, some of them. And at the end of the day, when we had finished negotiations and it went for final approval in the European Parliament, there were 80 members of the European Parliament that refused to vote for Sweden as a member because for some reason. So the fact that there are people inside the European Union who think that Turkey should stay on the outside is nothing new. That has been the case with all. Ask the Brits, but even us Swedes, we had that experience. So patience. The historical experience is that a democracy that knocks on the door of a democratic European Union will at the end of the day never be refused. It will take some time. There are significant reforms yet to be undertaken in Turkey, obviously, in order to prepare it. Turkey is a big player, will have a big impact on the European Union. So patience and determination. And look at the history, and you will see that that has been the path to success for other countries that have knocked on the door.
You actually recently co-authored an article that was published in the New York Times on December 10th. The co-authors were, apart from yourself, was the United Kingdom's Foreign Minister, Italian Foreign Minister, and Finland's Foreign Minister. And you talked about a couple of the things that Turkey should be doing, just as you mentioned, and also what the European Union should be doing and should be looking at enlargement from a positive perspective rather than a more skeptical perspective. There is a lot of, since the accession talks started back in 2005 for Turkey, there's been the accession process has been painfully slow. And support for the European Union accession has been deteriorating not only in Turkey but also in the European Union. So what can be done in order to reboost this accession excitement, let's say, on both sides?
Part of the explanation for the difficulties is, of course, that we have gone through fairly difficult economic times. So priorities have been elsewhere in a lot of countries of the European Union. Naturally, I hope that will change. Then what we need to have is, of course, the strategic perspective from the European Union side where, in my opinion, a larger European Union would be a stronger European Union.